In this next episode of our Getting to Know Jesus series, we visit Samaria and learn about the controversial and challenging message Jesus taught about outsiders right here in his homeland. This is Israel. When Jesus lived here, this land was home to the Jewish people. The Bible calls it the Promised Land, the land God promised to give Abraham and his children forever. And Jesus himself was one of these very descendants of Abraham who called this land home. That's why I thought it would be great to learn a bit about some of the outsiders in Jesus' homeland. Who were they? How did Jesus interact with them? So I drove into the heartland of biblical Israel to talk to Sandra Barras, Orthodox Jew and director of Christian Friends of Israeli Communities in Israel. Sandra met me at the 3 Seas Outlook in the mountains of Samaria, the location she thought would be a great starting point to learn about outsiders in the first century homeland of Jesus. Well, I am here today with Sandra. We're in Samaria, and we are at a place that I've never been before with a view like I have never seen in this world. Sandra, thanks for bringing me here.
Oh, you're welcome.
Yeah.
It's not just what it looks like, but wait till you hear what really all happened here.
And that's what we want to get to today. We're going to just get to a point in a story, but before we go there, tell me why this is so significant to Jewish history, this place where we're standing and the view that we're seeing.
The story of the Jewish people begins in Genesis 12. Before that, it's rather a universal story. Mm-hmm. But in Genesis 12, God speaks to Abraham, calls him out, says, leave your family, leave everything behind, go to the land that I will show you. And in Genesis 12:6, he comes to a place, he comes into the land of Canaan, that's what this is called then, and he comes to a place called the Oak of Moreh. Mm-hmm. And while he's standing at the Oak of Moreh, God appears to him for the first time here in the land of Israel, and he says, I will give this land to your children. Okay, now over there, that mountain with the houses, coming down the hill, that's the Oak of Moreh.
Okay.
So Abraham is standing on that mountain. God says, I will give this land to your children. This is the view that he's seeing, okay? And
wow.
It's just amazing.
And he's looking this way, but also the other way
as well. He's looking everywhere.
He gets the whole 360 degrees, yeah.
Absolutely. And then he starts walking from that mountain south. He passes through what would have then been the Shechem of biblical times, which you can see there in buildings even today between those two mountains, which we'll get to in a second. And he walks south, and the Bible tells us then he goes to Bethel, where he builds his second altar, and he keeps going south, and he ends up in Hebron. Mm-hmm. And this is all Highway 60 of today.
Right.
So, it's just amazing. So that's the first place that things begin. Now, let's fast forward about 400 years, and the children of Israel have left Egypt.
Right.
And they're wandering in the desert. And then they come to the east of where we are now, east of the Jordan River. And they're there in what is called in the Bible the Plains of Moab. Mm-hmm. That's there, okay?
Okay.
And what's Jordan now, which is over there to the east. And and Moses is speaking to them and giving them instructions. And one of the things he does in Deuteronomy 11, he says to them, now when you come into the land, you need to go to 2 mountains, Mount Gerizim and Mount Ebal. And when you're there, Moses said to him in a very interesting way, he says, you're going to place the blessing on Mount Gerizim and the curse on Mount Ebal. Now, this refers to a covenant ceremony that will take place. The covenant being, if you obey God, you'll get blessing. And if you disobey God, you'll get curses. Okay? So these two mountains come to represent the blessing and the curse. Well, you see over there, those are the two mountains.
Right.
Mount Ebal with the antenna up there,
Got it.
that's the mountain of curse. And to the left is Mount Gerizim, that's the mountain of blessing.
Yeah.
So, and this actually happens, it's described in Joshua 8. The nation of Israel, they cross the Jordan, they capture Jericho, they capture the Ai, they take care of some other business down there, and then they come here. And the entire nation of Israel is standing there
Yes.
in that valley and up the slopes between Mount Ebal and Mount Gerizim, and they enter into a covenant with God here in the land of Israel as a nation for the first time.
Then there are a group of people that sort of appear in the story a little later on that are going to kind of pop up throughout ancient Jewish biblical history. Talk to us a little bit about them.
So that's the Samaritans.
Right.
And the first time we see them, they're not even called the Samaritans. It's in 2 Kings,
Yes.
chapter 17, I believe. And we have this amazing story. Now, we're standing here in Samaria. This is the place of the northern kingdom. The kingdom after King Solomon splits into two kingdoms, and this is the northern kingdom. And the northern kingdom is exiled, destroyed, etc., by the Assyrian Empire, about 120 years before Jerusalem is destroyed.
Right.
So this is already a place of cataclysmic things have already happened here. And part of the Assyrian policy is to move people around. They don't want rebellions. So they figure if they take the native population and dump them somewhere else, they're less likely to rebel against the empire.
Right.
So they took out the Israelites from here, brought in other people. And those people are pagans. And the story goes as follows. It's amazing. You can read this in the Bible. These people are attacked by lions. And they are at great loss. They don't know how to pray. Because a pagan religion, you pray to a god of a particular territory. Where they came from the east over there, where their god is Chemosh, and he doesn't reign here. So they go to the Assyrian general, and they say, who do we pray to here? And the Assyrian general finds a Levite. And he comes and he teaches them about the God of Israel. And the story ends that they then pray to the God of Israel, but they still pray to Chemosh. You know, they don't want to give him up. You know?
They want their bases covered. It's kind of like those foxhole prayers, right?
Right. Anyway, those are the Samaritans.
Okay.
So they come here, they learn about the God of Israel. The assumption is that we know, in fact, that there are remnants of the Israelites here. We know that because also in the book of Kings, we know that after the exile, Hezekiah sends messengers out here to the remnants, inviting them to come to Jerusalem to celebrate Passover. The assumption is that these people mix and assimilate with the remnants, and they develop their own version of Judaism, shall we say.
Right. And now you mentioned, we were talking earlier, you said that they actually considered themselves, or got to consider themselves at some point as Israelites.
Yeah, well, you know, I have a friend who's a Samaritan today. And I asked them, tell me your story. And the way they identify themselves is they are Israel.
Wow.
But they don't deny that we're Israel. I think maybe at one point they may have, but today they don't deny it. They just say, you know, sometime long time ago, there were two priests and they had a fight, so we split.
Like that's ever happened before, you know.
Right. But it's faster. But our story, of course, starts in the Bible with these people. Now, what happened is the Samaritans built a temple on Mount Gerizim.
Right. They thought they had the place, the holy place, but...
and then Jerusalem, they want, you know, these people.
Yes.
So you can see that there's a competition going on.
Of course.
You know, what are you doing in Jerusalem? Our holy mountain is on Mount Gerizim. I don't know if you realize this, but the Samaritan Bible, which is only the 5 books of Moses, with some changes. And one of the changes is where in Deuteronomy, God says, you know, I'm going to select this place, a place that I'm going to select to place my name. And there's no mention of what that city is in Deuteronomy. In the Samaritan Bible, they write in there Mount Gerizim, just so that you don't make any mistakes. You know, this is it. And that's it, Mount Gerizim.
Very interesting. Now we fast forward to, you know, to our book, to the New Testament, where we have a story about Jesus who's going from place to place, and it says in the text, you know, he had to go through Samaria. Well,
I guess my first question is, did he really have to go through Samaria, and would that have been a wise choice for him?
Well, no, he definitely did not have to go through Samaria. In fact, from what I understand, Jews who were coming from the Galilee to Jerusalem would have gone down by the Jordan River. In fact, they probably would have gone down the eastern side of the Jordan River, where there were Jewish communities, and would have then crossed by Jericho and come up to Jerusalem. So the fact that Jesus chose to go via the hills, now it's a direct route as the crow flies, and in fact, he probably was traveling the same route Abraham did.
Interesting.
But that was a time when this whole northern part here in Samaria was Samaritanville, you know?
Right.
And they were hostile to the Jews.
Exactly.
So he really took a risk in going there.
So he comes here to this area. It's not advisable. It's probably not even smart. And yet, you know, in the story, it seems like he's on a mission to meet with one person, this Samaritan woman at the well. And by the way, we are standing over the area where there's a well that's been identified as Jacob's well, the place where Jesus met with the Samaritan woman. And can you point that out for us? Can we see it from here?
Well, you can see the town. See, here you have the mountains, Abal on the right and Gerizim on the left, and in between you see all those buildings down there.
Okay.
Right? That is the city of Shechem.
Yes.
And it's in there. Right in there is where it was.
We can't make out the rooftop of the church from here, at least with the naked eye. But here they have this encounter, and it's interesting. The sticking point in the conversation, one of the sticking points in the conversation between Jesus and this woman, seems to be this area of worship and where to worship. You know, she says, "Well, you say we should worship in Jerusalem, but you know, we say we worship on Mount Gerizim." And so you now have sort of the whole picture, the context of what's being discussed in this story. But of course, Jesus wasn't here to argue about worship. He was here to you know, talk to her about himself and those kinds of things. But it's amazing to be able to come here and not just sort of think about the story, the characters in the story, but also look over here and say, that's where it happened, like right there. Right there. Amazing. So thanks again, Sandra, and don't you go away. There's more coming up right after this.
When we come back, we talk to the experts about Samaritans and other outsiders in and around the homeland of Jesus, and the controversial message he had regarding them. I was a pastor for over 20 years before I first went to Israel, only to realize that I was totally disconnected from the roots of my faith. Since then, I've been on a journey of discovery, and my faith has come alive in ways I never could have imagined. I'm Jeff Feuders, Executive Director of First Century Foundations, and I'm excited to invite you to explore the land of the Bible and to discover your part in a Bible story that isn't over yet. First Century Foundations exists to reconnect Christians to the foundations of Christianity. And we do this by creating Bible-based media focused on Israel. But we don't just reconnect you to Israel in the Bible. We help you participate in what God is doing in Israel today by connecting you to over 70 ministries in Israel who desperately need our support. Will you partner with us? Together, we'll explore Israel's biblical past while playing our role in Israel's bright future. It was so enlightening to talk to Sandra at the Three Seas Outlook in Samaria and learning about Samaritans who lived here at the time of Jesus. It helped deepen my understanding of Bible stories in which they have a key role, and it made me want to learn more. So I talked to a few experts in Israel about the few interactions that Jesus had with outsiders and the message that he had regarding them.
Jesus' ministry was primarily to Jewish people, to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. He did not, in the beginning of his ministry, speak of or seek out contact with Gentiles. And of course, the land was primarily Jewish, and his interactions were with Jews. Although Jesus is sent to the lost sheep of the house of Israel, he does have a few specific encounters with Gentiles. One is the Gerasene demoniac, who is living in a graveyard on the eastern side of the Sea of Galilee. And Jesus comes and delivers him from the demon. The other very beautiful encounter that Jesus has with a Gentile is when he meets the Syrophoenician woman. Jesus has gone to Tyre, the city of Tyre, which is where it is today in Lebanon. He has taken his disciples with him. They're extremely exhausted from nonstop ministry, and they want to be alone. I'm telling the story as Mark tells it. They go into a home where they receive hospitality, probably from a Jewish family who live in Tyre, and they don't want to be seen. And this woman, so a Syrophoenician woman who's a Gentile and a woman, I mean, all these negative aspects of her identity are listed. She breaks into the meeting I think in Mark's story, it's like she walks into the house and she says, "Please, I have a daughter who's ill, can you heal her?" And Jesus says, "Oh, it's not all right, I can't give the bread of the children to the dogs. So no, I can't do it." Remember, he's on the verge of burnout. And so she pauses for a moment, and she says to him, "Yes, but even the dogs deserve a little bit of crumbs from the master's table. Even the dogs." So she's willing to say, "Okay, I know I have no status, I know I have no claim, but don't you think that even a crumb could be beneficial for us who are the dogs?" Jesus stops, and in the Gospel of Mark, he says to her, "For this saying, for this logos, your request is granted." He doesn't say because your faith. He says, for this insight, for this understanding, I'm going to give your request. Your daughter's healed, go your way. They just have one conversation. She just says one thing. What is it that she says to him that is so impactful that it makes him give in? What she is suggesting is that if you are the Messiah of the Jews, who are the children, doesn't that mean, though, that then you have a responsibility to have a blessing that extends? Because you're the son of Abraham and the son of David, isn't your blessing supposed to extend out to the Gentile peoples as well? I'm part of the crumbs, I'm part of the Gentiles, but where's the ripple effect that will come to us because of you being who you are?
Jesus came first and foremost to the lost sheep of the house of Israel, to the Jew first. But he did speak to Gentiles, and in one case that stands out to me in remarkable ways is the time that he was with his disciples coming from the Galilee, coming through the area of Samaria toward Jerusalem. And he sent his disciples into the city of Samaria to get provisions, and he walked alone to a well in Samaria. And a woman came to that well. And I watched The Chosen not long ago, and it impacted me so much, that particular scene when he went to the Samaritan woman. And ever since then, it's been popping up in my mind many, many times, thinking about how Jesus went to the one. You know, he could have just gone to the crowds. He became famous. He was a celebrity, but he went to the one. And that one went back to the city of Samaria and told everybody in town that she had met this Messiah.
So in the story of the Good Samaritan, very famous story, there are so many angles of lessons here in such a short story. He's talking about who is your neighbor? Who are you supposed to take care of? What's the two greatest commandments? Love the Lord your God, love your neighbor as yourself. Well, how can you be considered righteous before God if right in front of you is someone who needs help and you don't help them because of their title, because of their lineage and background, or because of your job that you need to go do that's really more symbolic than anything else, and yet you failed to meet the need of the person right in front of you? He kind of uses the Levite and the priest in the story who walk by as an example of what not to do. On the other side, he's using the term Samaritan on purpose. He could have picked all kinds of descriptions of people, but he knew that there was a problem between the Jewish people and the Samaritans at that time. But he's using that terminology of Samaritan on purpose to get the listener's attention to say, I am welcoming even the Samaritans here. This is a very intentional usage of that terminology.
Jesus said that the greatest commandment is loving God and loving your neighbor. But you know that Jesus didn't make that up. It was already written in the book of Leviticus. Ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. Well, there were a lot of commandments written in the book of Leviticus and the book of Exodus and the book of Deuteronomy and in the book of Numbers. But some of them are easier to do and some of them are harder to do. And evidently, loving your neighbor as yourself, which of course is a great verse, but it represents hundreds of commandments, it's a lot easier written and said than done. So much so that the prophets of the time of the first temple, all throughout the hundreds of years of the establishment of the first temple, were screaming, guys, love each other. Don't worry so much about to give sacrifices. Don't worry so much about the ritual. God's all right, but you guys have to love each other like brethren, like brothers. And guess what? As much as Isaiah and Jeremiah and Ezekiel and Hosea and so many of and you know that there's only about 40 prophets that are mentioned in the Old Testament, but Jewish tradition has it there were thousands of prophets. But even only the 40 or so prophets that were mentioned in the Old Testament, all of them talk about just love each other, just love each other. Why did they have to say that so many times? Because the people weren't loving each other. And that continued to happen until the days of Jesus.
Don't go away. When we come back, I visit the Inn of the Good Samaritan to revisit the famous parable of Jesus in its first century context.
First Century Foundations is committed to helping those in Israel who are most in need. And this is possible because of people like you. Your donations are supporting the most vulnerable in the land, especially aging Holocaust survivors. By providing them with food and medication and spending quality time with them, First Century Foundations with our partner ministries are making a real difference in the lives of people who have experienced so much suffering.
People like us who lost everything and live with the pain, to have people that help us a little bit, we're very grateful.
Call or write today and receive our bi-monthly newsletter, including the Israel Prayer Watch, to help you pray for all the ministries we support in Israel. Partner with us for just $30 a month or more, and your generous donations can make a difference in Israel today.
I left Samaria and headed toward Jerusalem. In the first century, this road was notoriously dangerous due to wildlife, desolation, and thieves with plenty of places to hide. Just 18 kilometers away from the city of Jerusalem, I stopped at the Inn of the Good Samaritan. In the days of Jesus, this location functioned as a way station for pilgrims. It was the perfect place to meet my good friend and tour guide, Richard Frieden, so we could reimagine the parable of the Good Samaritan.
Richard, there you are.
Jeff, how are you?
I'm good.
Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Yeah.
We were just in Samaria.
You were just in Samaria, so this is good because we're at the Good Samaritan Museum. This is the commemorative location of that great parable that Jesus speaks about in the Gospel of Luke.
Right.
So welcome.
Thank you. Well, you know, we had this interesting conversation over there.
Right.
Sandra was showing me the Mount Ebal, Mount Gerizim, where the well is in the city of Shechem, where Jesus met the Samaritan woman. So we've got a bit of a crossover here in terms of the Samaritan theme.
Right.
We want to talk about another story where a Samaritan is involved and where Jesus asked that really important question, you know, who's my neighbor?
Who's my neighbor? And this is predicated by, you know, a person that is an expert in the law. And he's saying, what do I do to inherit eternal life? And then there's this challenging question, and then there's Jesus, who is essentially saying, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and all your might, and your neighbor as your thyself.
Yes.
We're here along the road, you know, say is Samaria and this beautiful commemorative site of that parable. And there is someone that's found on the side of the road who's been attacked by robbers. And we see in the Gospels that a priest is walking by. Now, this would be a Jewish priest. He's walking by and sort of doesn't have the time of day to administer any kind of first aid or, and then there's a Levite that's walking by, and also he has is not administering help to this person. It's actually the Samaritan, the Shomroni, who does the right thing. Mm-hmm. He actually does the right thing, not invalidating anybody in the story. It's just humanity and the frailty of humanity and the condition of one's heart. It was the Shomroni, in this context of all people, that reaches out and goes beyond, above and beyond, helping this person who's been injured. It reminds me when Jesus says, where your heart is, where your treasure will be also. Yeah. What is the condition of our hearts? And he's saying, go back to the basics. ואהבת את אדוני אלוהיך בכל נפשך וכל מאודיך. It's like, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might, and your neighbor as yourself. Walk it out. Take the time.
The Good Samaritan, you know, you mentioned the phrase above and beyond. I mean, he didn't just stop and help this person who's there broken and bleeding on the side of the road. He actually bound his wounds. He cared for him. He showed him compassion, put him on his own donkey and took him to a local inn where he paid for all of his expenses and told the innkeeper, take care of this man.
Yeah.
And I think there's just an amazing lesson here. You know, Jesus goes out of his way for the woman at the well to include an outsider, and then he makes an outsider the hero of this Good Samaritan story. And so here we are, we're standing on the road between, Jerusalem and the Galilee. As we stand here in this place, we recognize and we realize that Jesus says to all of us, everyone around us, anyone who is in need, is our neighbor. And you, no matter who you are, can be the hero of the story. I love that.
I love that as well.
And I love that when Jesus speaks into our hearts and into our lives, he says that we need to be caring and compassionate, just as he was. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your mind, all your soul, all your strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. What a great lesson, standing right here in this commemorative place of the story of the Good Samaritan.
Thank you so much for joining me today. It was so fascinating to learn about outsiders in the homeland of Jesus, from the Three Seas Outlook in Samaria to the Inn of the Good Samaritan. Be sure to join me again next week as we continue our quest to get to know Jesus better right here in his homeland.